Welcome back to the Dope Stroke podcast. You've got myself here doing the hosting and an interview this week. I have invited a good friend of mine. You've heard him on the podcast before. Dan Davies from Clipped is going to be coming to the show today. We'll be bringing you guys all things Ryder Cup, but from a statistical, say that twice, Trottie, perspective. So this is going to be how we break down the Ryder Cup, looking at the numbers. Now, this podcast is important to you if you've got an interest in the Ryder Cup, you want to know who you believe can win. On the same note, you might have a betting angle, or there's going to be things in here that you can learn about your golf game to help you improve as well. This episode is powered by Clipped. You've seen me talk about Clipped on my own social channels before. Clipped is a product that we use that analyzes your golf game by the numbers. Think ShotLink for the professionals, then put it into your game at the collegiate level or the amateur game. It'll give you ways in which you can practice what to work on. But today, I've got Dan Davies here on the podcast to talk to us about what we can take from the Ryder Cup teams and some of the best players in the world heading to Bethpage. Dan, what's up, mate? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Trottie. Very good to see you. Very excited about the Ryder Cup. Very much enjoyed watching the Walker Cup, which was a nice sort of starter, if you like, for team golf. But yeah, I think it's going to be another fascinating series of matches at Bethpage.
And before we kick off on this, I know you've been a little busy returning to your annual DP World Tour slot that I want to talk about, but give the viewers a bit of perspective on your history in the game, because we've never really covered that, and you've been around European golf at the top level for a long time that's led you on this journey to Clipped. Give us a little insight on that.
Well, yeah, my first job in journalism was on a magazine called Golf Illustrated Weekly that you'll probably remember. It really covered the tours. I was very lucky to get a job there between leaving school and going to university, and then continued writing about golf all my life, really, even though I worked for other, in other sections of newspapers and on sort of men's magazines and stuff like that. But golf has always been a great passion. I've written about it for most of the magazines in the UK and a number of them in the US. Been lucky enough to cover Open Championships dating back to 1990 and Ryder Cups even before then. Was at the Ryder Cup at Brookline in 99, which was a pretty amazing experience. And now I've come back to Clipped. I've been at Clipped for 4 years. We've had, as you said, amazing success in the college game. We've got over 200 college programs using the platform now, including powerhouses like Oklahoma State, the NCAA champions, Texas, Georgia Tech, and then on the women's side, Stanford, Wake Forest, Arkansas, and people like that. So, yeah, I'm back in golf. I'm loving being back in golf. As you know, I've built a very small golf course in my back garden, which sort of keeps me obsessed with golf around the clock. And now working in golf data with a lot of the most exciting players, young players in the world, which is a great place to be.
I think a few people listening to this are obviously interested in the golf industry. I think what people need to understand is it's relatively small. As big as all these global tours are, certain people in the industry, I'd include myself in this, other guys that work on the tour trucks, some of the managers, some of the journalists, yourself, Dan, we all just seem to meet together at all of these different venues, different places around the professional game or the leading college game. So I think that is the great part of it as to why there's so many stories. You touch on a history with the Ryder Cup and having attended them yourself. What a spectacle it is. Can you now what's the Ryder Cup, what it's become is unbelievable. Tell us about that in your own words.
Yeah, the first Ryder Cup I went to was at the Belfry. I went with two mates from school. We camped in my car and we were like first through the gates. I think that was 89. I think 89. It was. So
I went to 93.
Yeah, I was probably 18, and I remember going through the gates. It was really early when the gates opened. We got a position behind one of the early holes. I think it was hole 3 or 4, and then there was about 3 hours until the play started. And I have the ability to fall asleep anywhere, and I fell asleep. And when I woke up, there was a ball literally between my feet, and the fairway, which had been pretty much empty and the scene was deserted when I fell asleep, was now ringed with huge crowds. And walking towards me was Seve Ballesteros, whose ball was between my feet. He got up and down from there naturally. And yeah, it was just amazing. I mean, the 80s were an incredible time for the Ryder Cup. It started in 83 with that team that went over to to PGA National and very nearly won on American soil for the first time, led by Seve. And then that went into 85 with the win at the Belfry with Sam Torrance holding the iconic putt. And then it rolled from there, amazing wins away, like at Oak Hill, and then latterly Medina and places like that. And I remember when the Ryder Cup took place in 1987 at Jack Nicklaus's course. What's it called? It's gone out of my head.
Memorial, that venue?
Yeah, exactly, where they have the memorial. And myself and a mate, we were 16 at the time, we went to Heathrow to meet the team off the plane. It was that exciting that we'd all stayed up. We'd watched the Ryder Cup. We'd watched, Eamon Darcy conquer his nerves. We'd watched Ben Crenshaw snap his putter. We'd watched, Jose Maria Lathabal and Seve, dancing on the 18th green and Seve holding the winning putt and all that sort of stuff. And it was just amazing. And it captured the imagination of a whole generation of golfers. And it made me want to write about golf. So, the Ryder Cup has had a huge place in my life. And I've had some amazing experiences at it, including 99 at Brookline, when I was up a tree on the 17th fairway, along with about 30 other people, it must be said, when Justin Leonard held that 45-foot putt to drive the nail into the coffin. But it was an extraordinary first couple of days. Europe was so on top, and then America came steaming back in the singles, which is obviously something we saw in the Walker Cup and something we see again and again, in the Ryder Cup, that America have that strength in the singles.
Muirfield Village, just to put us all...
Exactly, Muirfield Village. How could I forget?
But yeah, 100%. I mean, I hear you. And those iconic moments that we can all recall, I mean, even bringing it into modern times, it still has... Obviously, for me, I can recall those moments you're talking about, but you get to Whistling Straits and the Jordan Spieth shot from down the side of the hill that he played there was phenomenal. And going into other moments that are created with Rory McIlroy's putt against Patrick Reed. I mean, Captain America himself in Patrick Reed. Obviously, now we have the incident with the hat that took place at the last Ryder Cup. So what was that? Hatgate with Patrick Cantlay, who's made the team again. As we look at the teams and you think about the qualification process, do you prefer more captain's picks or do you prefer the old style qualification?
I think with the way the tours have gone, I think the only way that Europe can really hope to compete is with 6 captain's picks, split between the qualification process and sort of world ranking. I think it would be very difficult if it went off, DP World Tour ranking as it used to do, because the dynamics of the world game have changed and more of Europe's top players, most of Europe's top players are playing full-time pretty much in the States while the PGA Tour season is on. Then they come back at the end of the year after the Tour Championship, play a few events here. So I think it's the 6 captains picks is a good way of doing it. I do feel sorry for, those players who really made a run at it and didn't quite get there. I mean, you only had to see Matt Wallace's disappointment after the tournament in Switzerland. He was crying his eyes out in the post-round interview because he'd set a goal of making the Ryder Cup and he didn't make it. And it meant that much to him. So I just think that the formula they've got for picking the sides is about right now.
When we look at statistics and you look at Tyrrell qualifying, playing a limited schedule to get in, can you tell us how impressive that is? I don't know if you have any statistical data that we can lean on here, but I mean, that's unbelievable.
We don't have a lot of statistical data on Tyrrell's performance in live events because we don't have access to that data. Obviously, he's played well. He's played well in the majors, although he's still yet to take that next step. So I think that those major performances obviously have stood him in very good stead. I think also the sort of pending decision over European Tour fines for joining Live, I think that has obviously played into the hands of Tyrrell and John Rahm. The Europeans want to pick their best players, and Tyrrell Hatton and John Rahm are undoubtedly among the 12 best European players. So there's been a combination of, the strong play of Rahm and Hatton, but also the fact that, Team Europe want to ensure that legalities, if you like, are not going to get in the way of selecting those two because they were, a very strong pair last time.
When we look at the last few years, and you mentioned they were a very strong pair last time, which then means we have data on those particular two playing together. But when we look at the last few years and the strategy behind Ryder Cup, certainly Thomas Bjorn spoke a lot about using analytics. I actually worked at the Belfry when the Ryder Cup that was cancelled tragically for 9/11 and came back put us on to even years. I worked at the Belfry for 2 years prior and during. And I couldn't believe how much time the captain, which I think was Torrance, was spending at the Belfry with the head greenkeeper and what they were doing to manipulate the golf course to suit the Europeans. And obviously 9/11, which tragically happened at pretty much, we're almost on the anniversary of that at the time of recording this, 2 or 3 weeks before the Ryder Cup. And for the right reasons, cancelled the Ryder Cup. But the golf course, we got to play in Ryder Cup conditions. And what they'd done, even then, they looked at the Europeans were more accurate and didn't hit it as far as the American team. So they'd narrowed the fairways up at 290 to 330 to tiger-proof the golf course. There was a tree on the third where you famously fell asleep and had Seve chip one from out of your scrotum, which is one effort. Well done. Anyway, basically, as between your ankles, shall we say, that so we don't have to cut too much of this. But the third hole had a tree that was pulled up and brought in to the right-hand side. It's par 5, hole 3 at the Belfry. And again, it was to tiger-proof the golf hole so that if you would leak it out to the right, you would have that tree. Now, Europe went on to win that Ryder Cup. Don't know if that had anything to do with it. It would have been part of it. But the role now that statistics play in the Ryder Cup, can you touch a little bit on that? I know you have data that we're going to get to, but how you see that play a part in today's competition and perhaps also in the Walker Cup as well.
Yeah, I mean, it plays a huge part. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Edoardo Molinari's role within Team Europe has almost become as the sort of first vice captain amongst many. Luke Donald has made no secret of how much he relies on getting that data edge. And I think the Europeans were very forward thinking in pioneering that sort of data angle to be able to give themselves an edge. And Edoardo Molinari, first started keeping detailed data on his own game, and then other players came to him, particularly Matt Fitzpatrick, who was very much a sort of poster boy for data collection when he won the US Open, spoke a lot about, the impact of Dodo Molinari's stats platform. You see, more and more and more good players are gravitating towards having objective data which they can look at rather than making decisions clouded on emotion. I mean, this is something we hear all the time from the elite amateurs and the young tour pros who are using Clipped, is that they don't want to sort of have their decision making clouded by the fact they might have made 2-3 putts in the last 6 holes and think that they're really bad at putting, when actually that ignores the fact that they hold 4 15-footers earlier in the round. And Molinari has been very meticulous. And as I said, as you mentioned, I was in Switzerland for the Amiga European Masters, and I was lucky enough to play with Rasmus Højgaard. And he was talking about the level of information that the players' caddies take around putting, about where they aimed, what the break was on a putt, whether they missed low, high, the speed, all that sort of stuff. They're obviously capturing a lot of data through things like ShotLink and the equivalent on the DP World Tour. But then they're really crunching that data. And what Molinari has done is they've done simulations, which is what we do at Clipped. We're able to simulate a player to be able to see how they might perform on a certain layout, on a certain course. And they've done that with things like foursomes, whereby they can see that Rory McIlroy hits X amount of fairways, but that extra yardage is going to give somebody like Tommy Fleetwood, who is really elite at, let's say, 140 to 160 yards, more shots in at that distance. And that went into the design of Marco Simone, another course that was built purely for the Ryder Cup. And I spoke to Dave Sampson, who was the architect at Marco Simone, and on the whole redesign there. And that design was very heavily influenced by the data, by the way that they wanted course setup and venue to play into the advantage of the Europeans. And to your point, you only have to look at the setup between somewhere like, let's say, like Hazeltine and Le Golf National in Paris, and they were two very separate things. Wide fairways at Hazeltine, flags that were sort of generous to get at because they know that the Americans make a lot of birdies. They know that they are, like you said, a bit wilder off the tee or less accurate at certain distances. So, those are just a couple of examples of how data has come to the fore in terms of analyzing who should be in the team, but more importantly, the pairings, because so much of it is down to those first 2 days. Europe have been very strong in foursomes in the last few Ryder Cups, although, the US did record a 4-0 foursomes win in a series at Hazeltine, at Whistling Straits, sorry. So, those first 2 days, squeezing the most out of your pairings, matching players whose games are complementary in certain formats, whether that's four balls, where it's really about making more birdies, or whether that's foursomes, which is more about probably keeping the ball in play and hitting greens and putting pressure on your opponents.
There's a lot to unpack there. Let's keep it for a moment on us, the listener. Is there one stat that we should all try and improve to improve our game? Say we don't quite yet have access to clips. Say we're on the brink of, do I need data for me? What would be one stat that we should all look to improve?
Well, I think personally, the stat is limiting the number of bad shots you hit. And that we can see that in clips because we score every single shot with shot quality, as you well know, Trottie. But I do think if you have a picture, and you can count this up. I used to do this before using clips. When I drove away from a golf course, I'd count up what I felt were really good shots. And then I count up what were really bad shots. And if I was significantly up in the good shots category, I generally played well. And it's a simple, very simple calculation and that's something that listeners can do on the way home from a round, and probably many do. I mean, now Clipped is able to really go into granular detail on that to show you not only where the bad shots took place, what they were, whether that actually constitutes a weakness in your game. So I think really trying to limit the bad shots, and that really stems from probably not going for shots that you're only going to pull off 1 in 20 times, and actually playing the percentages, knowing what good looks like for you. And I think that's, again, something that Clipped provides the objective data on. But I think that accepting yourself for a goal as a golfer, knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are, playing to those and being disciplined about it will result in a lower number of bad shots. And those bad shots for golfers like myself and probably higher handicappers often lead to another bad shot. And that's where things start to unwind. And that's where scores start to spiral.
So Clipped is very much about the game. Let's look at the Ryder Cup. It's match play. Is there a style and a blueprint statistically for a player that suits? You've already kind of touched on foursomes. There definitely can be areas that highlight what you need to complement another player. And your example you used was Tommy Fleetwood. And it was, hypothetically speaking, maybe, but being strong from yardages that Rory McIlroy might hit that golf tee shot to, then enables Tommy to access his strength of his game. But is there something in match play that you should look for in an individual, whether it's 1v1 or 4-ball better ball, that makes someone a good match play player? Statistically, you'd look at that in a clip data format and be like, okay, they're useful.
Yeah, I think it would be probably the most obvious one would be how many birdies or better you're making. I mean, that is always going to help you in match play. There are so many different ways to skin a cat. You only have to look at the way that Bryson DeChambeau won his first US Open on a course and with a style of play that just didn't fit that. So, I think that it's very difficult in the singles because obviously the two captains are putting out lineups. They've got sort of guesses on that. But you can be a lot more scientific when you're picking your lineups and creating your pairings for four balls and foursomes. And I think that in four balls particularly, it really is about the number of birdies you're making. I mean, you've seen some absolutely epic matches in the four ball format at the Ryder Cup, where there have just been birdies scattered like confetti. And I think that, driving distance, people who are making a lot of birdies, proximity to the hole, things like that, which actually can, in match play, you have really got the opportunity to impact your opponent with what you do. And I think that, four balls really suits a very attacking style of game. Foursomes requires a bit more discipline. It requires a little bit more accuracy, a bit more precision to be able to make sure that you stay in the hole.
So based on your comment earlier about Europe have had a lot of success in the foursomes, other than the whitewash you listed, I can't remember where you said, I think you said Whistling Straits. Could have been.
I think it was
somewhere
Whistling
else.
Straits, yeah.
Yeah. Do you foresee that to continue in this Ryder Cup? That we as Europeans should be stronger in the foursomes?
I think they'll definitely, Molinari, Donald, the team will definitely be targeting those two foursome sessions. I mean, to have got, last time out at Marco Simone, they went 4-0 and 3-1 in those sessions. That's 7 points of the 14 right there, 14 and a half that they needed. That's almost half coming from the foursomes. It was actually 2018 that, I'm trying to think where it was actually. There was a 4-0, I've got it written down here somewhere, but I think the Europeans will definitely be targeting the foursomes. They've had historically a better record there. I think the fact that the Americans don't play foursomes, they don't play foursomes at college, and all 12 of the US players have come out of collegiate golf like they've done for years and decades and generations, but they don't play foursomes at college, in college golf. So they do play foursomes in European tournament. They do play foursomes, obviously, in things like, big British tournaments and in, international setups in Europe. So I think that's an advantage for them. And I think also the accuracy advantage that Europe has traditionally had makes the foursomes sort of rich pickings. The four balls have been a lot more evenly spread. And actually, the US have probably come out on top in the four balls over the last few matches, because the players are basically playing their own ball and they're going out to attack, and they're going out to attack on a golf course that will be set up to suit them. Wider fairways, generous pin positions, really leaning on the fact that these American players know the conditions better than some of the European players, not all of them, because a lot of the Europeans play over there, but that the course will be set up for their specific strengths.
I guess we haven't got too deep into it yet, but play your own ball versus foursomes and using the same golf ball. People who are perhaps new to the Ryder Cup aren't aware that in a foursomes game, alternate shot, you have to use the same golf ball your partner uses. You put in 180 mile an hour ball speed like Rory McIlroy, and that can lead you to some serious issues if you use a different golf ball. Those players, and this is more me saying this, will probably be testing those golf balls now. With 3 weeks to go, Wentworth is this week on the DP World. I don't think someone will play a different golf ball, but they'll certainly be starting to practice at home or as they get on site in New York with the golf ball that they will be using in the foursomes. This has actually had massive impacts on contracts in the past where players have gone to a Ryder Cup, used a tailor-made ball for the first time, and then it's unlocked their interest in a tailor-made deal based on using that golf ball. But I look at some of the stuff you've prepared, and you were kind enough to share with me some of your analysis of the Ryder Cup, and there's reams of it, absolutely tons of it, so thanks for that. And I see that you've got written in here, importance to scoring. Tell us a bit, and it's amazing that the importance to scoring on both teams that you've broken down ranges from 52% is the highest category for one player, which I'll let you get into, and then the lowest number on importance to scoring, nobody drops below 28% is the lowest importance to scoring category, which is approach play for Xander Schauffele. So I'll let you explain that. but why does one particular area have such an impact on an individual's scoring? And how are you able to highlight that? And what impact will that have on a captain and a vice captain picking them to play a match?
Well, I think what importance to scoring shows in clipped is how the percentage impact that a specific skill, and we break it down into the four areas, off the tee, approach, around the green, and putting, but then we subdivide those into different categories and distance bins. But it shows you the importance of different areas on a player's scoring, both good and bad. So when they do something well, that will really drive their scoring. If they're off with that, they're going to have the same impact, but in a negative way. So it's almost like the player's DNA. And when you see that, as you know, you've got what to work on your game, and we break it down into sort of, I think it's something like 15 different categories within those four overall categories of off the tee, approach, around the green, and putting. And then we're able to really show you, the percentage of each category for that player. And, you mentioned Scotty Scheffler. I mean, his putting has been so much improved this year. And I think it's driven the stupendous season that he's had. And we did some analysis last year, like, how many more tournaments would Scotty have won had he just putted in an average, on an average level? And I think it was 2 or 3 more tournaments last year. So his importance to scoring, you see a sort of much bigger segment of that pie chart, if you like, on putting, because when he putts well, he goes away from the field. When he putts badly, the field comes towards him. That's a sort of big simplification of it. And then you'll have, a player like Xander, whose game, I think the biggest portion of his sort of DNA breakdown is approach, which is 28%. But, that suggests that his game is sort of more evenly balanced, if you like, between the 4 skills. So I think that what you can see is where players have specific strengths, within that. So, for example, Cameron Young is a great driver of the ball. One of his superpowers, his secret weapons, which we're able to identify, is off the tee with the driver. Similarly, sort of JJ Spawn is very good at approach across the board. So, that could make him an interesting selection for foursomes. Similarly, he's a good driver of the ball as well, and a good putter. I mean, you don't win the US Open or have the season he did without those sorts of identities to your game. He could be useful in both formats. But I think what's interesting is that Europe has Europe only has one change this year. That's unprecedented. 11 players from Marco Simone are coming back. The only change is Rasmus for his twin brother, Nikolai Højgaard. Rasmus is a great driver of the ball. He makes a lot of birdies. He could be somebody I would back very strongly that he will see his first action in the 4 balls at Bethpage Park because of that strength off the tee, because of that ability to make a lot of birdies. And I think that's where you'll see him come in. But similarly, we know that Tommy Fleetwood, his putting at the moment is superb, as well as what we know about his approach play, which has always been elite. So again, Tommy could be a player who's asked to play a lot of matches this year. He could play the full 5. I think Rory will play the full 5. I think Tommy will play the full 5, and then we'll see after that. But Europe has quite a settled lineup for the foursomes, or settled combinations for the foursomes. The 4 balls will always be interesting. US has a less settled lineup, and of those players that have played before together, they haven't been particularly successful. They got done 5-0 in the foursomes at the recent President's Cup. So, I think what Dodo Molinari will have will be this level of insight into all the players, where their strengths are, what their proximities are from certain distances, what their dispersions are like from certain distances. And then, as he's talked about, they'll simulate rounds of these players playing together and look and see who the best fit is.
As I look at your notes, I see that you've got course specific for certain players, who it suits and who it doesn't suit. And that would lend itself to me looking at that if your strength is off the tee, I mean, Rasmus is in the European list of names, but if you're long and straight off the tee, then this is the type of golf course that you're going to do well at.
Yeah, I mean, you've played Bethpage, haven't you?
Yes.
I mean, obviously that wasn't set up in Ryder Cup or US Open conditions, but what's your sort of perspective on Bethpage?
It was a
Bethpage
long
Black.
time ago. And I can tell you that because I actually played well, which feels like forever ago. But no, it was a long time ago. And my takeaway was when you play well, you always enjoy a golf course for sure. I played in a college event and I finished horrendous. The finish was what shook me for sure. I mean, I hadn't really missed many golf shots up until you play a par 4 up the hill. I think it's 15. And I mean, that would just crushed me. But I remember it being long, and I remember round the greens was tough. And because I hadn't missed many greens, I was enjoying it. And then obviously I missed all the greens coming in and finished just terrible. So it's not done until it's done. And I think that it can flip on a dime with a golf course like that, such as how tricky it is on and around the greens. I remember the greens being quick, and I don't remember it being too tricky off the tee. But to your point, we wouldn't have been playing it in tournament for us, but not tour conditions.
Well, it's interesting because Data Golf, they do a great job in terms of, tracking tour stats, and certainly I know a lot of people who bet on golf are very tuned into that. And they, in terms of their best course fit, Bethpage Black with the American side, they're looking at Bryson, Xander, Cameron Young, Justin Thomas. I don't think there's any great surprises there. And the worst being Morikawa and Henley, which I find interesting given your point that they're both renowned as being excellent iron players. Maybe that is because they don't hit the ball quite as far off the tee, that's why they are not seen as being the most obvious, course fit, because they are maybe just that little noticeably bit shorter off the tee. For Europe, Rory, Rahm, Ludwig, Rasmus, all strong, long, very good strikers of the tee, from the tee. And then the worst are Straka and Fleetwood, which is, again, a little bit surprising because Straka is a very good iron player. Fleetwood obviously is a very good iron player as well. But again, those might be just very tiny margins. I don't think we're saying they're a bad course fit, but of the 12 on each side, these Data Golf are saying that these guys come out stronger. These guys are probably at the bottom of the list. But course preparation, course setup will be a massive part of this Ryder Cup. It has become a bigger and bigger factor in the outcomes of Ryder Cups, and that's why we've had so few away wins. The last one was the miracle at Medina, and I think why possibly, obviously from my own perspective, I want Europe to win, but I think the Ryder Cup could do with an away win as well, and not a landslide home victory, which we've had for the last few. And I think that speaks very squarely to course setup.
And that's why, so that's why you think an away win is tougher, because of course setup.
Yeah, definitely. I think course setup and fans. I mean, obviously at Whistling Straits, we were in that sort of lockdown period and there were no European fans there. That's difficult to play in front of a completely partisan crowd. And, let's face it, the Europeans make it pretty hot for the American players when they play in a Ryder Cup in Europe. And there's been a lot of chat, and I know that there's a bit of resentment from members of the sort of American media that there's all this chat about how the galleries are going to be raucous and badly behaved at Bethpage Black because they're, it's a New York crowd and all that sort of stuff. I don't think they will. I think if Europe get off to a strong start and the USA get off to a really bad start, and particular players don't really hit the ground running for the USA, I think that crowd could potentially turn a bit on their own team.
Yeah, I think the same thing, which then brings me nicely to my next question, which is, do you think that the US team was picked with that in mind, with individuals on that list being jumped, noticeably Maverick McNeely. I mean, obviously jumped Keegan Bradley, Brian Harmon, Novak. I mean, there's 4 where there's players behind them who made it in. Do you think all that was done on statistics, or do you think an element of it was done on the fact that it's a New York golf course? The other thing is, statistically, and you can ask this one last, and it should maybe be a question on its own rather than staggered with 2 others. Statistically, surely Keegan Bradley should be playing in this Ryder Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I think all European fans wanted Keegan Bradley to play in the Ryder Cup. I think what Keegan Bradley has said about data or not said about data is very revealing. He might be playing his cards very close to his chest, and they might be really down the rabbit hole of this stuff and have got the same level of insights and data points that Dodo Molinari is providing for Team Europe. But from what Keegan Bradley has said, he is going a little bit more on heart and feel and sort of intuition. Again, I say that with a note of caution because he could be hoodwinking us all here, and he could be somebody who's really got this nailed down. But certainly from what he's said, I think Cameron Young, is from the area. He's got a game that would appear to be built for a muscular course like Bethpage Black. He's played very well in the tail end of the PGA Tour season. I think that's a good pick. I think that, I think it's difficult to argue against, you could argue against Ben Griffin, 19th in the world, but he had a very, very good season. And, he's a very good approach player, very good iron player. It's hard to say. I mean, I think that a lot of that team picks itself. I think the one question could be over Colin Morikawa. Obviously, he's 8th in the world, but he's really not had his A game for quite some time. And is that going to be exposed at somewhere like Bethpage, or is it going to bring out the best of him, which is, a scintillating iron player? So I think that it's a really interesting match between 2 styles. On the one hand, Luke Donald, very sort of even keel, very sober, very much attached to the data and digging into the data. And Keegan, heart on his sleeve, seeming to sort of, pick it on feel and what he senses is the right thing to do. Of course, that might not be the reality. I hope it is, because I think that gives Europe a great advantage.
I think from listening to you talk in this podcast, we're hearing how important driving is, which is very American-centric for a golf course, 100%. My take would be that Griffin and Henley are more European-style players for a foursomes battle, as potentially, Xander's become a global player for sure. Morikawa, you might have put in that bracket, albeit he's become a global player. But I think that looking at it, the tables are pointing towards the strength off the tee, which what makes Rahm such a good pick for the European team. As we get closer to this, do you foresee, from the data rather than the emotion, a European win possible here? And is it a higher percentage than other venues?
I think a European win is definitely possible. I think that they've learned a lot since the last big defeat away at Whistling Straits. I think Luke Donald is an excellent captain. I think they've got 11 players coming back, 11 players with Ryder Cup experience, and the one rookie, Rasmus, was there driving a buggy for the vice captains at Marco Simone. So he's got a sense of how that feels. And, having spoken to him about it, I mean, I've never met a professional golfer who looked happier, 3 days after securing his automatic qualification at the Belfry. So I think he is absolutely up for it. I think that they've got a great chance. I think, as I said, foursomes is going to be hugely important. Europe have got to press their superiority there. When you look at the way that the teams break down, the Team USA have 7 players in the top 10, 3 ranked 11 to 20 in the official world golf rankings. Europe has 3 in the top 10, 4 in that 11 to 20 range. If you're looking at world rankings, and that's where we that's where it starts to skew towards the singles, definitely, then America has an advantage. But I think that the level of preparation, I think the fact that the team are going out on the Sunday after Wentworth, they're flying out together, they'll be out there for 2 weeks, they're going to be really prepared. And it will be interesting to see whether current form, how people are playing, how those combinations are coming together on the ground for Europe, whether any of those sort of established pairs, particularly in foursomes, changes. Because we see that, for Europe, it's tended to be, Rory, Rahm, Hovland, Fleetwood, Ludwig, and Hatton are your sort of your hardcore of your foursomes lineup, and then they bring in Rose, Bob McIntyre, Straka for four balls, and I think that's where Rasmus will come in as well. For the USA, they've got the Cantlay Schauffele pairing, the Scheffler Henley pairing that played in foursomes last time. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see either of those rolled out again. And then in four balls, I think you'll see, Thomas, Burns, Cantlay, Cam Young, players like that. So I do think that experience is going to be a huge factor. I do think that preparation will be a huge factor. And I know that Luke Donald will not have left a stone unturned. So I think Europe have got a great chance. I think Data Golf had their probability down at, I made a note of this somewhere, but it was low. It was a low probability for a European win. 35.3% chance of European win. They had it 57.1% for USA. So obviously, there's still an 8% chance of a draw or a tie.
Got to be an American company, hasn't it?
It is an American company, yeah. But I think that they're crunching the data. As I say, this is all part of a landscape that's becoming more data-driven. I think Europe have got a great chance. I would be having a bet on Tommy Fleetwood to be top point scorer, because I do think he will play, unless he gets off to a really bad start, I think he'll play in all 5 matches. His putting is excellent. He's on a high after winning the Tour Championship. And then I think there are some other, very interesting selections in there. It'd be interesting to see how Patrick Cantlay plays.
Give me something to do here, because you were just getting to the point. I was going to say to you, is there anyone you think will stand out on either team? And which is why I've stopped you, is there anyone you're concerned about? And the reason I stopped you is because I see from the data that you've provided, Cantlay overall putting is 54 right now in the world, or in the rankings that you're keeping. Patrick Cantlay's whole game was built around putting at one point, I would imagine. I mean, you can give us more sort of information on that, but we're looking, is he a player that you're worried about?
Putting is the most important part of his game, and we look at importance to scoring, it's 35%.
But he's not putting well.
He's not putting well, but he has put himself there or thereabouts in the last few weeks, so his trend is trending up. And
I think he's now working with Phil Kenyon, by the way, which is shout out Phil Kenyon, a friend of the podcast. You mentioned earlier with Scottie Scheffler and the importance of his putting. Phil's done amazing job with him, and he's also done an amazing job with Tommy Fleetwood, who you also said is putting off the charts. So it's interesting how all these guys use the same coach,
Yeah, well, Rasmus was saying that, Phil Kenyon's in a really difficult situation at the Ryder Cup, because he's got players from both sides. But Rasmus did say that he is European. But it's the same for probably Mark Blackburn, who's got players on either side of the divide. I mean, that's a really uncomfortable position for a coach to be in, I would have thought. But Cantlay, I think, I don't know, I've just got a feeling that Cantlay-Schauffele partnership, which has been a bedrock of recent Ryder Cup teams, they, I think, are vulnerable. They didn't particularly perform last time out. It'd be interesting to see if they're trusted to go this time. I do think Cantlay's on a bit of an upswing in terms of trend, so needs to be watched because he's a good match player. He is a player like Patrick Reed, who you mentioned earlier. He doesn't mind being the sort of lightning rod for the boos and the catcalls and the whistles. And he almost gets strength from it. And I think those sorts of players are actually few and far between. So I think Cantlay could be a really interesting one to watch. I think if it goes really badly for him, I think it goes badly for the US. I think if he gets a really strong start and he sets himself up again as the sort of, almost the black hat, if you like, for the European team, then he could get things really rolling. But if he plays badly, I mean, I don't think the New York crowd will sort of waste much time in reminding him that, from what we understand, he was one of the prime movers behind the US Ryder Cup team being paid.
Well, I was going to say, does he wear a hat?
Well, he'd like to think that they would have got one to fit him this time, because that was the the excuse last time. I think he's a really interesting one. I think JJ Spawn, who's had a really great season, it would be interesting to see how he's used.
He's a great player. Statistically,
he's
he's
a really
got
good all-round game. 7th in the official world golf rankings. Been very, very impressive this season, pretty much from the get-go. I mean, he's like, his strokes gained total, he's 10th on the PGA Tour stats. And if you look at that top 10, you've got Scotty 1, Tommy Fleet, and he's almost a full shot ahead of Tommy Fleetwood in 2, Rory McIlroy 3, Russell Henley 4. Interestingly, Harry Hall at 5 was a player who was overlooked. Justin Thomas, Ben Griffin, Sepp Straka, Patrick Cantlay, JJ Spawn. So Cantlay, PGA Tour strokes gained total is in the top 10. So, and as I said, he's trending upwards.
So not a bad pick.
Yeah, I think that, again, I think the Scotty Scheffler is going to have something to prove after being given a 9-7 last time with Brooks Koepka against Victor Hovland and Ludwig Aberg. Scheffler is so far ahead of everyone else at the moment. I mean, he's leading so many categories, stats categories on the PGA Tour. In terms of what we see for player quality and clipped, he's out in front. Does he take on that real leadership role? Surely he's got to play all 5 matches because of just who he is. But then, there are interesting stories all across the board. I just got a feeling that Europe are going to do it. I think that they've got a really strong, experienced team. I think they've got a real bond, and I think they're going to be very well prepared.
I think between Phil Kenyon and Joe LaCava, we could have 2 outliers that could impact the Ryder Cup.
Yeah, well, I think we'll have to keep Joe LaCava and Rory maybe
separated.
Apart.
And we'll have to somehow stop Phil from leaving Southport. He can only do remote lessons with the European team.
Who do you fancy to shine? Who are your sort of out? Who do you think is going to step forward from the chorus line, if you like? Outside of the big dogs on each team.
I think, and he's a big dog, but if asked, Rahm is going to just show up. I think he's just been starved of this level of competition. And I think Rory said a couple of years ago, with all the live and the PGA stuff, if Jon Rahm isn't there, we've got no chance. I think in turn that brings Tyrrell to a place that is just standing on the shoulders of giants. So I think they'll be the 2 for me. I think Rory will be phenomenal too. I think he'll be re-engaged with the game. I think Ireland has been something that has shown him that he's back and interested in playing golf again. So that's where we're at. I'm so happy for Tommy Fleetwood, as everyone in the world is, that he got that win and got that off his back. I think that changes his Ryder Cup experience. I think he'll have a nice time. How many points he gets, I'm not sure. But I think your impactful players are going to be Rahm and Hatton, because they'll play together. Probably, if it were me, I'd bang them out in 4 matches if they get off to a good start. I think Victor is, you look back at football, soccer terms, I think Victor is the Jimmy Bullard of our team. Maybe not him for those that know him, but he's the one who takes the heat out of the room, makes everyone chill, makes it very European, as does Shane. I think Shane will play a role, but the role that Shane and Hovland will play. Hovland, I think, is going to do great, by the way. But the role that Shane and Hovland will play will be more behind the scenes, as impactful as what they do on the golf course. I've got some fear for Fitzpatrick again, just because you always look at his data and you just, the one stat that matters at the end is matches won. And I think it knowing him and how much he looks at data, I think he's a little bit like me in that sense. I think it concerns him, and data is a great thing that can be used to run you with confidence, but it can also put fear in you and doubt in you if you haven't perhaps got it at that moment. And I think that we need to play well in practice in order to put it into play in competition. And this is a massive cauldron of a guy who he's done well in Boston. He's won US Opens, obviously, in that part of the world before, but this is New York. So you may not see a ton of Fitzpatrick. He may get hidden. I think Bob McIntyre almost put himself in a tough spot behind the 8 ball with some of the comments he made when he nearly won that tournament, which Scotty came through at. But I think that'll be protected because Bob will be with Rosie. And I think if you can go out with anyone on that team, you probably want to go out with Justin, because I would imagine some of the things that he can tell you and say really protect you. And then I think another sleeper for the Euros will be Sepp Straka. I know he had a few personal issues looking in the media, which I didn't quite get to the bottom of as to why he skipped an event. But Sepp just seems someone who is a bit like Harry Hall. He plays in the States. He knows what to expect. He seems unshakable. He's from a part of Europe where he gets on with everyone. He's a big guy. He's basically a US player. So I think he'll be our sleeper that will sneak us probably half his points, to be honest. And I think this could, if we win, it's going to be the Rahm show and it's going to be the Hatton show. Now, on the US side, I think you're looking at, I love Xander Schauffele, but I don't know if he's in prime Schauffele form. Morikawa, same. I like the guy. I don't know if he's in prime Morikawa form. I think Scotty is going to have a target on his back, and the Europeans are going to go out wanting to beat him, which makes it harder for him. So it's going to sit on Bryson and Cantlay, and LaCava will be spinning the cauldron as well. So if Cantlay grabs a Rory, that gets tougher again. And I don't think Cantlay has the firepower to take that on round Bethpage Black. And I think if you do look at the top end, Bryson will be good. And he will come out good, and he's an entertainer, and this will be his thing. But if you do run into someone who gets a hot hand, that becomes a problem. But I look at the Cam Youngs and the players that have made that list, and Ben Griffin, Henley will be super solid. It doesn't put the fear of God into me looking at it as a European. The sleeper for them will be JJ Spawn, without doubt. JJ will have a great Ryder Cup, I think. Just because if you can win a US Open on those last few holes, having played Oakmont, it's so difficult. And just the way he's swinging it from a golf technical point of view, and the way he's so connected, and the left armpit coming through, and the way that holds the face so passive to the target, which gives you ball launch conditions that are just phenomenal. That's going to hold up under the pressure. And I think he's going to be the one that is one to watch.
Yeah,
I do think Europe
agree.
have got a chance of winning. I do think so. I really do think so.
I think what you said, Trottie, is you highlighted the fact how many leaders Europe have got in that team.
Yeah.
Tommy Fleetwood, Rory McIlroy, Victor Hovland, Justin Rose, Shane Lowry, John Rahm, and then below that, just a tiny bit below that, players like Tyrrell Hatton, Ludwig Aberg, who had a great Ryder Cup debut last time. Not even
being mentioned, cracking player, cracking statistically.
Bob McIntyre, like you say, who's won in the States. I do worry a little bit, like you said, about some of the comments he made. If he can keep things under control, I'm sure that Luke Donald will be talking to him about that, because
you do have to. These lads, though, like the McIntyres and the Lowrys, get fired up on stuff like that. The Ludwigs, who's just the most beautiful human in the world, doesn't need that sort of jazz going on. And he won't have it going on, which makes him it puts him in the Sepp Straka column for us. He is someone who will go about his business and do very well. You put Victor and Tommy in the same media category, because the media are going to play a role in this. It's the ones that are going to cause the chaos that want it. That's the Cantlays, the Lowrys, and the McIntyres. I think they want the chaos. And I think the way that Luke manages that, because he only has Rasmus as his rookie, is to bang Rosie with McIntyre, because Rosie puts out the fire and just is like...
Yeah, and they were great last time. You've got, McIntyre's very strong driver of the ball. Rose, whose iron play at the moment is just elite from, 100 to 180 yards and every sort of divider down that. And has just got so much Ryder Cup experience. I mean, that was an established 4-ball pairing last time. We'd be very surprised not to see that this time. I think the one thing I think you could see Rasmus playing with a sort of Rahm or a Victor, I wouldn't be surprised. He told me that he's played a lot of golf with Rory and also Shane Lowry, because he's based down in Florida with his brother. And, when they're not playing tournaments, they play quite a lot together. So there's a connection there. And I think that, his caddies suggested that he felt, because the caddies are, as I said earlier, are filling out all this extra information on putts, and they're speaking to Dodo Molinari. I think he perhaps got the sense, or maybe the intuition, that Rasmus might play in the 4-balls, which I think makes sense on all the data. But I think that there's a lot of leaders in that European team. There's a lot of experience. But, there's always players that come out of Ryder Cups as the unlikely heroes. I mean, the whole history of the tournament over the last 40 years has been sort of the unlikely heroes. I'm sure there'll be another one this time. I think JJ Spawn is a really good shout, not only US Open, but lost a playoff at the Players' Championship as well, which is another one of the most exacting tests in golf. So I'm looking forward to seeing him. I think you're right. Scotty will have a target on his back. It all depends on how he embraces that leadership role alongside people like Bryson, Justin Thomas, whose record is not that great. So, I don't think it's necessarily seniority that is going to make you necessarily a leader on the US team. I think, you're going to have to come out and deliver, especially in front of that crowd.
I think one thing's for sure, we're in for an amazing event. And I think as we look to put a conclusion to this podcast, I've got a story that I'm going to end it with, which is an absolute belter, which is going to be some advice for our friend Phil Kenyon and any other coach that finds themselves in this scenario. But Dan, amazing information. Clipped, anyone that wants to know about it, just check it out, clip.com. You can learn all about how this data is gathered, but how you can use it for your own game. It's a massive one. And the biggest thing for me with Clipped is that what has blown me away, having been someone who works a lot in golf, plays as much as they can, feels very passionate about their game, and is not playing well right now. Clipped will tell you that. But the bottom line is you create a circle chart for your golf game. We've touched on it in this podcast about how Scotty's putting is so important for his game. And Xander is a very rounded player, because I imagine the circle chart for him is split equally between the pillars that make up your own golf game. But just how much from a live view you can move it. You work on your chipping and approach play around the greens gets better. Then you work on your putting, because that becomes a priority. That gets better. And such is this game that we're all involved with. Then you lose off the tee and you lose your approach play. But it also, as an equipment guy, really gives you a picture as to what areas of your golf bag you should look to change. If you're not chipping well, are the wedges right for you? If you're not driving it well, is the driver right for you? If you're not great from 140 to 180 yards, look at that category. Have you lost flexibility in your whatever you do to condition yourself to play? I think Clipped is a really early sign to show you what you need to work on, which is why I lean on it all the time for data that's powered for our podcast by Clipped. So Dan, thank you very much. You can check him out and also check out his own blog that he writes, which he does so well around his own golf course and his own journeys in golf. But here's the story I want to leave you with, Dan, before we move on. So I mentioned 2003, I was connected with the Belfry and the Ryder Cup. And the piece I left out is that I was actually fortunate enough to be offered to work in the US team room. So a young Trottie turns up in his early 20s in effectively looking like a penguin with a waistcoat on, a white shirt, a tie. And my job for the week was between the hours of 7 p.m. and 3 a.m., and there was not a lot to do. Pick up a couple of plates from players' room and stand in the corner, be available for all the players. Pick up a few plates, clear those plates, try not to drop them. When the US team went to the opening ceremony, put periscopes and hand warmers and mittens into all of the USGA officials' rooms. There were 300 rooms that we had to do that for. That was a task. Wow. There are other stories involved in that I will come to. And then every night, obviously, these guys are professionals. They weren't big drinkers, but there would be a caffeine-free Diet Coke and a Miller Lite taken from the room service area on the room where the players stayed, there was a fridge, Coca-Cola fridge, and the only thing I had to replace every night was 1 Miller Lite and 1 Diet Coke caffeine free. Can't remember the players. It'll come to me. It's relevant for this story. However, I was stood in the team room during several motivational conversations, and after the US team had lost the tournament, a story came out from Paul Azinger about how he'd had a treacherous time that week playing, and he holed the bunker shot on the final day, which was a beautiful shot, but he'd really struggled. His game had been awful and off. Paul Azinger, for those that don't know, is a major winner, fantastic human, to be fair, commentator on US networks.
And a great Ryder Cup player.
And a great Ryder Cup player, extremely competitive. And Azinger was going around the night before, and he was on the range very late. I even think there was a generator running floodlights in September at the Belfry. So, I mean, it's dark pretty early. And he's out on the range. And at the back of the range, and this is him telling this story, so I'll do it as good as I can. There's a plume of smoke coming from a cigarette, and it's a roll-up cigarette, and there's a rounded chap sat on a golf cart at the back of the range, and there's only Azinger and his caddy out there. And Azinger turns and looks at this figure and says, are you going to help me? And through the fist, and those watching this on YouTube, if you're still with us, the roll-up is in the mouth. And the plume of smoke goes out. And he says, I didn't think Sammy will be too happy with that. And it's Bob Torrance. Bob Torrance is an iconic golf coach. Worked with Harrington would be his most famous work. Obviously, his son is Sam, who's the captain of the Ryder Cup team on the European side. And Zinger turns around and says, Bob, I'm proper struggling. And he says that Bob gets up off this golf cart and meanders over to him. The roll-up goes again. Let's see you hit a few up close then, Zinger. And Zinger starts hitting this ball, and he describes that, he's got a divot pattern that's going one way, ball flight going the other. He's just lost. He's got a double cross miss. There's no prediction to what's coming out. The flight windows are different. And he turns and looks at Bob, and he says, look, you've seen 5 or 6 shots. You got to help me. And he's hanging on his every word. And Bob says to him, Zinger, come close. And he pulls him close to him. And he says, Sammy's not going to be happy with this. He says, but do you know the secret of golf? And Zinger apparently is like, this is it. I'm going to get the secret of golf. In my darkest hour, I'm literally going to get it from Bob Torrance, who's going to help me go on and win my singles game. And this is going to be fantastic. US are going to get an away win at the Ryder Cup. And Bob Torrance is from deepest, darkest, like the Highlands in Scotland. And apparently through the fist and the roll-up cigarette, he goes off into just losing himself about what he feels are the key areas for golf and the golf ball. And it goes something along the lines of, well, Zinger, what you need to do, if we back, you need to good idiot, and you get to took the back swing, and then you did it. And he goes on, and Zinger's like, he finishes, and all that's happened is I've inhaled most of the roll-up cigarette that's now down to his nails, and I haven't understood a word of what he said. And through the smoke, he looks at me and he says, as he drops the cigarette, and that's the secret of golf. And he walks off. And Zinger said he was no further forward, to which he went on and battled his way through his singles. And obviously the Europeans went on to win. So
Bob Torrance was an amazing coach, like you said, but he was quite difficult to understand at times. But Zinger,
I mean, mate, any information that our boys need that a European coach is going out and coaching that team, just do your best Bob Torrance impression and you'll be fine.
Well, I think we got to have a word with Phil Kenyon about that. Definitely,
exactly.
Maybe he can develop a very rich regional accent. But Azinger was a great captain as well, and actually somebody who did look at data and did change the culture. And they didn't really stick with Azinger's blueprint for a long time. Whereas in Europe, there is a succession plan, it seems. It's not like you get a new captain and he tears it all up and starts again. They're using the same blueprint that people like Paul McGinley and Bernard Langer and these people established. And then they're adding to it. And I think that, Azinger, he might not have got the secret from Bob Torrance, but he certainly had the secret as captain and was a very, very good captain.
The Europeans are building on their tradition, as we tend to do over in Europe. So there you have it, folks. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. We've got it dialed now. Maybe you and I should be running for vice and captain as we go forward. I'm sure we've got some motivational speeches in here somewhere. Folks, you can find all of these episodes, be it on Spotify, iTunes. There's going to be a YouTube version. Yes, I know I need to get a HD camera. We're working on that. We've had it in the comments. I've just got to learn to set it up. Thank you so much. Behind the scenes, we got Lauren, who's going to wrap this up for us on the production. Dan, make sure you don't go. Until next time, folks, that's it. Dope Stroke Podcast. We'll see you next week.